Hi there, and welcome to a video on active reading, which is the topic of Chapter 1 of your textbook, In Concert. Before you view this video, you should have already read Chapter 1. The video is just to reinforce the main ideas and important concepts of the chapter. First thing we need to do is define active reading. Active reading is actively engaging with the text. You're not just reading it and going through it, you're thinking about it, you're analyzing it. You may be annotating it, which means taking notes in the margin or highlighting it or underlining or circling things. You may be questioning it. You're like, why does it say that? Why is that what it is? You may be challenging it. You may be thinking that can't be true. I need to think more about this. You could even be criticizing it, and that means thinking about how the author wrote it, why they wrote it that way, and how it could be done differently. So it doesn't mean necessarily that the reading is bad when you criticize it, but that you think about it and think about different ways it could have been done, why it was put together that way, and so forth. So active reading is really getting down and dirty with your reading. Now, the book has several active reading strategies in it and a little chart at the bottom of one of the pages, but here are a couple examples of what active reading really is. Analyzing the purpose of a reading assignment. Why was the purpose, or why was the reading written? What was the purpose of the reading? Was it to inform you? Was it to entertain you? Was it to persuade you? So that's always something important to think about. If you find that when you're reading you're having a difficult time and you really need to take your time with the text, you may adjust your reading speed. Some of us read slow, some of us read fast, some of us read in the middle. But sometimes you need to take it easy and slow down to really ingest the material. So that's another strategy. You might question ideas in the reading assignment. You might say, well, what is this? Why is this the way it is? And another good thing to do is skim headings and introductions and conclusions to find out what the assignment is about before you actually read it. And we're going to talk more about that. So these are just some things that active readers do. So when we talked about skimming, that was previewing. You may have also heard it called surveying before, and that's fine too. Previewing is just a way of familiarizing yourself with the organization and content of a reading before you actually read it. So you're going ahead and you're looking at it, but you're not quite reading it yet. So when you're previewing, it's a good idea to look at the title and subtitles within the selection. You may find that there are lots of little subtitles, or maybe one or two. You want to check the author's name and maybe think, do I know this author? Do I know anything about them? What do I know? You want to read the introduction or the first paragraph of the reading, because that's going to give you a general idea for what it's about. You're going to read each bold-faced heading. So anything under a subtitle that is bolded, you're going to want to look at. And you may want to look at the first sentence under each of those headings. And page 16, 17 has an example of previewing, so we're going to look at that real quick. So here's an example of previewing that you should have already seen in your textbook. If you want to look at it too, it's on page 16, 17. You see that the student has been given an article or an essay to look at, and they've previewed it by highlighting the title, Alternative Scheduling Arrangements. They have read the first sentence in the essay, and I might go ahead and read this whole first paragraph, the introduction, to kind of tell you what it's about. Now, if you look below that, they see we've got a subtitle, which they've also highlighted, and they've read the first sentence of that. And again, subtitle, read the first sentence of that, and so on. On the next page, you see that they've done the same thing throughout, and then they've read the entire conclusion. Reading the introduction and the conclusion is going to give you a good idea of what the main idea of the paragraph or essay is, and then reading the conclusion is going to reinforce that main idea so you can look at it again. And seeing all these first sentences and subtitles and titles are really going to help you see what the main points are. Now here's another example from within your own textbook. We're on page 19 in the textbook. You see the title of this chapter was Active Reading, And here's a subtitle, Form Guide Questions. So that's something you would highlight if you were going through this book and maybe read this first sentence. Then beneath it, you see bolded things. Those mean they're important. And you're scrolling through, you see a nice chart. And on this page, you've got another subtitle and more bolded things. So that's how you can kind of tell things are important, by looking at bolded things, by looking for subtitles and headings and things like that. They're going to help you preview the material. So you can see this subtitle and heading. So for our book, you can actually see that subtitles are this kind of teal greenish color and headings are purple. And then important information is bolded like this. So after you preview the reading, it's a good idea to make predictions about what you're going to read. You want to kind of think about what's going to happen and kind of question what it is you're about to read based on what you just previewed. So you can ask yourself the following questions like, how difficult does the material look? And that can determine if you need to read slowly or read quickly. You can look at how it's organized. Like I just showed you, our textbook has titles, it has subtitles, and it has headings, and has bolded information. What's the overall subject matter? What are you reading about? Chapter 1, of course, is active reading. And at what points do you need to stop and review? Do you feel like there's a place where you're like, maybe I should take a moment and review what I just read before continuing on? So you can make predictions about your reading after you've previewed it. Also, another good thing to do before you actually read is to form guide questions, which are questions that you expect to be able to answer by the time you finished reading it. And you can think about these in your head, or you can write them down. Sometimes I might ask you to write them down just as good practice. But here are some tips for using guide questions. And a good way, a really easy way to create guide questions is by turning major headings into questions. So the heading up above, tips for using guide questions. Turn that into a question. What are the tips for using guide questions? You expect to be able to answer that by the time you're done reading. So all those subtitles and headings in your text that we just looked at, you can easily turn those into questions to use as guide questions. Now as you read, look for answers to your questions. If you're looking for the tips for using guide questions, you should expect to find them. Keep an eye out for them. When you finish reading a section, stop and check what you remember. Make sure that you can recall the information. When you're creating guide questions, don't ask closed-ended question. A closed-ended question is something that will have a one-word answer, like yes or no. Yes or no questions are no good. You want to start your questions with what, why, or how. So, for example, what are the tips for using guide questions? Then, of course, you're going to read. Read through the material. Then maybe reread it, review it. Then, after reading, it's important to check for your understanding. One way that your book suggests doing this is with an idea map. Now, you don't have to do this every time. This is a nice suggestion to help you understand the organization and content within an essay in particular. So here's an example from the book that it shows you where you put the title and then you put the main idea of the essay. Then you talk about the topic sentences or key points, and then the conclusion. So this is a good exercise for you that we may do in this class. You'll definitely make outlines of this kind when you write essays. You may also map out an essay when you read it. Now when you're reading, of course, vocabulary is going to happen. Now your vocabulary is going to get built, and that's great. We are going to work on vocabulary building in this class. And we'll keep a vocabulary journal in this class specifically for this reason. And we're mostly going to do it through our reader, our class novel, A Dog's Purpose, but we also may read other readings and do it with that, or readings, information, vocabulary words from the textbook in concert. So pages 23 to 24 has a lot of great tips on it for figuring out unknown words or for looking at vocabulary words. But when all else fails, what you need to do is mark the word as you're reading it, especially in A Dog's Purpose. mark the word, highlight it, circle it, underline it, and then once you're finished with the reading, come back to it after you're done and use a dictionary to look it up and then add it to your vocabulary journal that we're going to keep in this class. Lastly, this chapter talks about thinking critically. Thinking critically means that you're not just doing the work and just mindlessly doing it. You're evaluating it and reacting to what you read rather than just accepting it for what it is. So when we read A Dog's Purpose, we're going to think about it more than just, oh, we're reading this nice story about a dog. We're going to think about why we're reading this nice story about a dog. We're going to think about how the characters react to one another and what is the point of the story and why is the point important. So critical thinking is evaluating and assessing. And so we're going to ask ourselves questions about our readings. Why was it written? How was it written? How could it be different? And so on. So here's our attribution. This information was from your textbook in Concert Reading and Writing. And this attribution is written in the MLA format, which we're going to learn this semester. You can take a look at it, and we're going to work more on that soon. So please make sure that you read Chapter 1, Active Reading, if you have not already.